Good afternoon. It's an honor to speak here today, and thank you all for coming. The more and more people that I see at these kinds of events, the more I'm encouraged that social change is really happening, because there's a lot of bad news. And unfortunately, it seems to me that the more that we learn to unwind these kinds of things, we have to learn to see them. And I was talking to my 18-year-old niece last night. She goes by Ladybug Bree, and she said to me, she said, you know, sexual violence, it erodes trust. And I thought I needed to address that. I thought that that was really important, because all of a sudden there seems to be nothing that we can trust. And what I realized in talking with her, that it was so important to talk about what it meant to raise our awareness, to see these things in our lives that we have, in essence, been taught. It is not indigenous to be a sexual perpetrator. It is not indigenous to be hostile in any human being. If you ever spend some time around little tiny ones, that's not indigenous to who we are as a people, as a race. You know, there's one race. Many kinds of people, one race. So I spent some time with her last night, and we came up with some points about my talk today. And so I want to acknowledge her, because I really wanted to speak to the young people here today, and I had to review for myself what I didn't get as a young person that I felt like I needed. And now, looking back as an adult, I had to think about that, you know? So, first of all, I wrote notes, you know. She reminded me to say as my first point that sexual violence is not your fault. And then I got thinking about it, and I got to think about whose fault it is. And I decided that it was us adults. It's our fault. And it's our fault because we are responsible for the next generations that are growing up. And it's our fault because we are unable to stop the messages that are so pervasive in our media. And if I was in control of our media, I'm not sure I should be. But nonetheless, I was thinking about that. And I was thinking, if I would like to see in our media something that helped us all work together. It helped us have honest relationships where we learned how to be patient with each other's growth, but also learned how to have a backbone with a lot of kindness and love and sharing and caring behind it. Because that's the kind of just world I want to live in. And that's not what I see on television. I don't own a television. I see a lot of things, messages on Facebook and those kinds of things these days because I'm on the computer. But Christmas time, I was over at my dad's house, and he watches a lot of television. And there was a commercial on about an upcoming show on Sunday. And in that commercial, it was a horrible commercial, and I saw that commercial at least 6 times during the day. Now, you probably have realized that's probably a lot of television that I sat there with my dad, because he watches a lot of television, you know? But that's how it is. And, you know, in that, what I saw was a man who was grabbing a woman by the neck and dragging her into a grassy, damp area outside. And the next thing I saw was her throat that was cut. And she was dead on the ground. And he was gone. I saw this at least 8 times a day, every day that I stayed with my dad over the holidays. And I think, what is that going on? Who does that serve? What is it like to be a boy? Seeing that every day. So when I was talking to my niece, I told her that I had never had a role model of a woman that had triumphed. And this isn't something, you know, that I would normally talk about. You know, we don't talk about sexuality in public very much, as in my own family ways. But there's sexuality I've noticed absolutely everywhere. You know, on women's barely clothed bodies, in beer commercials, on billboards, on all those kinds of things. I feel like and for me, I see a lot of those messages as sexual violence. And there came a day when I had something to say about that, and it was, by the way, this has a good ending. I figure I should tell you that. So. But there was a man that, I used to leave my front door open sometimes in the summertime, because it's so beautiful out. You know how beautiful it is? And I live on a tiny little street with a whole bunch of houses on it, but it's so beautiful outside. I have a garden. I just love my house. It's a sweet home. And sometimes I leave my front door open, and a gentleman who had been watching my house for quite some time walked into it, and he thought that it would be, I don't know what he thought, but he told me to get on the ground. And I got the message very quickly, what he wanted. And that's something I've never understood, because sexuality is sacred. It's, that's why they talk about consensual sex. It's something very sweet, beautiful. But that's not what this man wanted. And I told him no. We exchanged a few words about that, but it was very difficult to talk at the time. And he didn't believe my lie that, my husband was in the backyard. I tried, but it didn't work, I mean, you just try, And so, he knew that he had to take me down. And it just so happens when I was like 12 years old that I learned how to do this maneuver. So I did that. I did that behind his, right leg. And I pushed him down. And he fell on the floor. And he was so kind of weak that he had to turn over to get up. And so I stepped on his back. And I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but I now realized that I was standing on his lungs. I had never had anyone in my life tell me that it was okay to fight back. That's not how I was raised. Even though I saw a lot of violence in my life, it wasn't something that I was supposed to engage in. And I was a good girl, I believed in that because I really wanted this idea of a just world. I wanted those kinds of relationships that I was talking about, where the relationships are the center of our community. And I knew that as a child, and there's some way that I've never quite let go of it, even though I'm not always able to make it happen. But that said, I stepped on his lungs, and he couldn't breathe, but I didn't know that. So he kept trying to get up, and I'm kind of like surfing, and then I start to laugh because I'm surfing on this guy who's coming to my house, and I don't know what exactly to do, but, it was a good way to, I guess, discharge some of my nerves, because then I had to figure out what to do when I was standing on this man's back, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't have any role model, anybody I'd ever seen to know what to do in this kind of circumstance. I was ill-equipped. I had to come up with it myself. And so I decided I had a few things to say. And what I said to him is, this is what you do, isn't it? This is who you've become. You are a man who goes around finding vulnerable women. And you know that some women never recover from this kind of thing. And that's what you have chosen to do with your sacred life. I said, don't you have a mother? Don't you have a sister? And then I realized that I was really too far from the phone to call for help. And that I would have to do something. And I stood there because that's what I had to say to him. And then I realized that he was crying. And I wondered, and I wonder still, did anyone ever say that to him? Because I think it's possible that he didn't realize the role model of manhood that he had learned. Because this society, the problem is not only violence against women. The problem is we have a hostile society. That it's very rare to have someone invest time in finding out who you really are besides what you look like. Which is really elementary. I mean, that's really low. You know what I mean? If that's the bar for humanity, that's really kind of low. And no wonder so many children and young people are traumatized by that fact, because that's a low bar. And that's why it's adults' fault. Because we were given this, and now you are inheriting it. And there's many of us that are trying to stop that, and we need you. We need you too. We need a critical mass. I knew you probably want to know the end of the story. The end of the story is that I realized I was too far from the phone, and I told him that he was going to stand up, because the door was still open, and I was going to kick him out the door, and he was never going to come out. Then I noticed that he had peed on my floor, and I really wanted him to get out, so I got off him because there was pee on my floor. And it probably saved his life, you know, because I had the capacity to kill him right then. I had a choice. I knew I had that choice. I could have jumped on him. He would have died. I felt his bones, click, click. You know, like my feet were like a chiropractor, you know? And that's what happened. He stood up, and I kicked him out the door. And I shut the door. And I don't have my door open very much anymore. And that's what my niece is talking about. It makes it hard to trust. And sometimes I keep my door ajar. Because I don't want it to permanently change who I am. You know, I'm an open door kind of person. I really believe in that. I don't think we should have to frisk everyone. That's not right. And I'm an educational researcher. The more police presence there are in schools, the more violence there are in schools. Because we're creating a culture of hostility with the police presence. Because we're the warm parents and uncles and aunties, and that's who our teachers are, right? That are reminding us what we need. That's who belongs in school. Centering healthy relationships. That's why I went to grad school and education, because I believed that was possible. That we didn't have to succumb to an economy that has hostile relationships, because our economy is our local exchange of energy and resources. An economy is what makes a community. We exchange things. This economy in this culture is a hostile one. And what's kind of good about corporate control is now everyone gets to be a little hungry. And if you're hungry, you'll start to see why. I think that there is a blessing to some of the hardships that we're finding under economic hardship these days. I was also asked today to mention something about people who are labeled LGBTQI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. Sometimes going under the term of queer or different gendering. What I want to say is that there's a lot of hidden ways that sexuality, which is really in a private affair, is in this culture translated to sexual violence. Because of the privacy of sexual relations, when we name someone their sexuality, that is a form of exposure. And people that are under that idea of queer are seen as their whole entirety is who they choose to be intimate with. That is sexual violence. People that are under the idea, under that name label of queer, are the highest population of police brutality, and to be incarcerated as well for minor offenses. A person who is transgendered can be arrested and found guilty of disturbing the peace because of their clothing. Right? What happens is all these kinds of isms, they converge under hostility. And in this way, even if someone might be privileged by being a man, for example, they lose that privilege by being gay because they are now vulnerable to these systems of thoughts that are organized around the idea of sexuality. There's really high rates of when young women and young men come out as queer and then are raped to, I suppose, torture them or something like that, to teach them. It's learning a horrible lesson, isn't it? So I want, as part of this healing process, we also have to be able to ingest, to recognize and be aware of these forms of sexual violence. The kind of thread in them is the hostility. How do we welcome each other and be with each other to learn? Well, I'll tell you another quick story because it made a difference in a high school I ran with the Northwest Youth Corps quite some time ago. I had this young man steal bus tokens from my desk, and I didn't know what to do. Because, we had a budget, and I just didn't know what to do. And so I decided, well, I'm going to go to the students. And I had my own little, adult lecture, which was, hey, do you have to lock your doors at night? Because you're worried about your belongings being taken? I don't want that culture in our school. And then a whole bunch of students started to tell us things we didn't know. They were like, someone stole my jeans out of my locker. Those are my second pair of jeans, that's all I own. If I knew someone really needed them, I would give them to them if they didn't have any. That's how my students were, they were really giving. But when we dialogued about it, something really shifted. And then some of the students, they knew who the student was, so they wanted to beat him up. And then I said, well, we can't have that. We are a community. We have to figure out how to do this. This is a lesson to me. That man that when I stood on him, I have to recognize that he's human, He deserves respect. He deserved someone to say some of these things to him. And I hope that what I said to him was the last day he did anything like that. He deserved to be parented. That is probably an unparented young man. The same thing is true for my student. And it just so happens that his fellow students encouraged him to return the bus tokens. And 20 years later, I hired him to put a countertop into my kitchen. And 20 years later, he told me that he had been pretty much a kind of kleptomaniac, or whatever they call it, when someone steals all the time. He told me he didn't know why he did it. He always did it. He did that. He was always searching for something that he could take. Not because he necessarily even wanted them. That was the last day. Sometimes young people, they just need to be honestly parented. And there's nothing wrong about that. And I'm finding, I'm 46 years old, that there's moments that my friends, they tell me the truth, and I get some of that parenting, that parenting I needed really a long time ago. When I realized, there's something I learned when I was 5 that I never unlearned. We're still learning. That's my message to you young ones too. We are still learning because we learn without words. School's all about straightforward teaching. That's not how the biggest learning happens. We learn without words. Your role models. You have patterned yourself after those people, those 10 people in your childhood. You are patterned by that. You get to choose now, but you can't choose if you don't know what's there because you didn't learn it consciously. You learned it unconsciously. You learned how to eat. You learned how to get warm. You learned how to ask for, food and water. All those things before you could talk. You learned without words. These are the things that early time is very, very powerful in us. Now you get to choose. So you're here because you don't want to pass this problem down. And I want to honor that in you and thank you. Because you are the kind of people I needed when I was small, that I didn't get. That's why I'm telling you the stories now, just in case you didn't hear it. Just in case I tried to figure out what I needed. And just in case there's one of me here somewhere. Because I understand some of the things that if you don't know that you can fight back, you don't, right? You have to learn it. That man, he became the gift where I got to learn I could stand up for myself. That was very important. I'm not actually thankful, but it was important, You know what I'm saying? And that is kind of like whatever you have on your plate, it becomes a lesson. Then we can honor the lesson, and it doesn't have to be a burden anymore. The burden was not mine, it was his. But until that day, I pretty much lived in fear. And I'm inviting you to not live in fear. I'm inviting you to know what to fear. What to fear is if someone walks in your house like that. But every single day, I would walk around in fear because I knew that was possible. Because I saw those commercials on television over and over and over and over. And I knew that I wasn't the man in that picture, I was the woman. I thought that, because that's what media taught me. And I wasn't thinking, I wasn't good at discerning. Because I wasn't able to discriminate all those messages, right? I was a little person. Those are the things I'm talking about what healing means. Understanding these things we've learned really small. So that we don't live in that habitual fear. Because then we can't love. Then we can't celebrate. Then we can't sing. Then we can't play. Then we can't do all those kinds of things. Let me see if my niece had anything else to say, just in case. I want to remember her point about stealing. That sexual violence steals our ability to trust. I want to end on that note because I had something to say to her about that. It steals our ability to trust that person because you'd be really stupid to trust that person again. Don't do it. Don't trust them. They're not trustable. They're like a little person who's learned a horrible thing. They don't know better. And there's a lot of adults that don't know better. That's the place we are in history. Look at history. It's not over. You are part of the transformation.